This is just a few questions. I'm Marc Sims. My guest is Bryan Alexander. Bryan Alexander is professor at Georgetown University and host of the Future Trends Forum. Welcome to the show, Professor Alexander.
Greetings. Thank you for hosting me.
Man, I've been watching Future Trends for years now, and I enjoy it. And so, first question out of the box: what is the Future Trends Forum?
The Future Trends Forum is a weekly video conversation about the future of higher education. Every week we host one or several guests, each of whom have some piece of the puzzle of the future of higher education. They might be librarians, they might be professors, they might be presidents, journalists, politicians, officials, startup founders, or critics. But we put them in conversation with the forum audience. So to be clear, I ask a couple of questions at the beginning, kind of basic questions to get things rolling. But then I put it over to the audience for their questions, and that's where the real magic happens. Our audience is incredibly diverse. We have people across academia, from liberal arts colleges, community colleges, state schools, universities. We've got presidents, we have students, we have all kinds of folks. And we have a bunch from outside of the U.S., from Canada, from Europe, from the Middle East, from North Africa. And we just have an organic conversation. There are no presentations, no PowerPoints, no slides. It's just entirely back and forth, and it's delightful.
Well, I never went to college, but my wife, my children, a whole bunch of people I know went, and I couldn't care less about a lot of people went to college until my children went to college, and I was in my 50s at the time. I really got into it. So I love listening to your show, watching your show. So here's the second question. Currently, Professor, what is on your mind writ large about college?
A whole bunch of things right now. And so I'll be really quick. One of the leading concerns I have is that American higher education seems to be financially as well as politically unsustainable. Our enrollment is down. People's opinions of higher education are also down. And we've been dealing with a rash of institutional cuts, mergers, and closures. And that seems, there's a lot of good reason to suspect that will continue over the near and medium term future. And this concerns me, but also concerns almost everybody in higher education who I speak with. My second concern is that we're not really taking climate change seriously. And that has a deep and complicated series of impacts on higher education. And we have all kinds of things we can do in colleges and universities to respond to climate change, everything from research and teaching to changing our physical campuses. And my worry is that we're behind the curve on that. The third thing I'm thinking about, and this is perhaps more popular, is I'm thinking hard about AI and how that impacts higher education. So I write about this a great deal, and that's a really, really complicated topic, but that's my third area of concern.
Yeah, it was a time the MOOCs are supposed to put college out of business. Of course, demographic trends, especially here in the Midwest, Northeast, and maybe artificial intelligence may I wouldn't say put the nail in some colleges, but you know how this stuff works. So let's go to the last question, and we can talk after that. Here's the last question, a main question I had: is it for a lot of students, and who are those students? That's the question. Is a bachelor's degree really worth the cost?
It's a fantastic question, and it's one a lot of people are asking. And just for everyone in the audience to keep in mind that there are a lot of details to this question, so I'm going to try and hit them really quickly. The thing that scares most people is student debt, and there's a good reason to be afraid of that. In the United States, the amount of student debt total is about $1.7 trillion, not billion, but trillion. We owe more in student debt than we owe in credit card debt, which is kind of mind-boggling to think about. If we're thinking about this in financial terms, a good number of people are able to go to college, get a degree, and have a career that follows that is better financially than if they had not gone. But not everybody. There is a good number of people who go to college and don't get a degree. And we know that there's a thing called the sheepskin effect. If you go to college and take class after class, if you go to Harvard for 20 years and you try and get in the job market, if you don't have a degree, it's as if you never went. So a lot of people take some classes and do not get a degree. So that's one problem we have to think about. Second problem is there's a good number of degrees that just don't have good odds of having economic results on the other side of them. And sometimes it's the specific discipline, sometimes it's the specific program or the institution. And we don't really have really good and accessible ways of grasping that. I mean, there's some popular cultural ideas that, STEM, business, allied health tend to pay more, and there's a lot of truth to that. The arts and humanities tend to pay less, and there's a good amount of truth to that, I'm afraid. But also, it just really varies from institution to institution and program to program. Let me just return to the debt problem again. In a sense, for some degrees, for some people, student debt is actually a good bet. That is, if some of the stats, and there are a lot of studies about this, show that if you go to college and get a degree, if in the course of your life you make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 more a year, or sorry, in your lifespan, than you would have done if you just had a high school degree, well, the normal amount, the median amount of student debt is about $30,000. So $30,000 to pay for $300,000, that's a good bargain. 10-to-1 return is something that we should celebrate. And that's kind of the original vision going back to the 1960s. Problem is, quite a few people graduate and they don't get a chance to start working right away. Either they are unemployed or they're underemployed. They're working in something which isn't the field that they trained in as an undergraduate. And then the debt continues to pile up. And of course, debt is very, very difficult to discharge in bankruptcy or even through death. And this, in other words, the specter of student debt is pretty large. And for some people, the options are actually, they look a lot more appealing. So if you're, say, a 17, 18-year-old young man getting a job in a physically intensive field such as HVAC or plumbing or woodworking, could lever you up into the middle class in a few years without any debt at all, which is pretty impressive. Now, we're talking about undergraduate degrees. I should also mention associate's degrees that are offered mostly by community colleges, and those can be very beneficial. Those can be the gateway to quite a few jobs, again, especially in industry, technology, and some service jobs. But we don't talk about those enough. So that's my long-winded way of saying it depends. And we shouldn't say college degree is a sure shot to middle class or to riches, because it really does depend. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and I love it when your college professors are long-winded. You can go right ahead. Now, like I told this story before on the show, that the wife and I, we sent our children to college. That was our dream. She went to the local college here in Chicago. And that was our dream, for them to have an on-campus experience. And we had no idea what it cost, and it doubled when they were going to grammar school and high school. But it's very simple. We have a small house, old cars. We don't go on nice vacations. We didn't want to buy a bigger house. We chose to put our children to school with no debt because that was our dream. So I understand about that first, because my children are half first generation because my mommy went, daddy didn't go. And so the point is that having those conversations throughout the community, of course, in a lot of schools, especially in the part of South Side of Chicago, there's just not enough counselors. And so it's tough to have that conversation, because even our own families and friends, no one's asked us, how'd you put those kids through school with no debt? And that's a community thing that we don't have that, throughout the milieu of this neighborhood or whatever. We don't have those type of conversations without getting too far in each other's business. So I think do you think with better information, starting in grammar school, starting in elementary school, that people can make better decisions and make better choices? What do you think?
To some extent, and the information is pretty cloudy, and there are reasons for that. I mean, we have roughly 4,000 colleges and universities in the U.S. They're not organized into a system. I mean, at best, we have a kind of ecosystem, and it's really hard to get data on this. We saw this during COVID. Quite a few, for example, as a small example, quite a few colleges and universities put out dashboards of their local COVID experience, COVID infections and so on. There was no uniform standard. It became impossible to compare, and ultimately, we just don't know the impact of COVID on American higher education in terms of the immediate physical effects. The Obama administration for 8 years leaned hard on higher education to try and reform it, and they largely failed. The one thing they were able to do is create the college scorecard, which is something better than nothing. There are a few other efforts that are out there which are useful and impressive, but they don't get a lot of traction. Instead, what is most popular is U.S. News and World Report, which, by the way, inside academia, everybody despises it. But everybody pays careful attention to it because it has so much influence on the outside world. Um, but we have other problems as well. You mentioned advisors and counselors. I mean, there's a huge need for that in high schools, and we don't really have nearly enough supply. I mean, that field is massively overworked. But we also have, asking a 17 or 18-year-old to make a decision like this, they might not have the financial literacy behind it. They might not have received that kind of background in their K through 12 experience to really figure out, okay, what does a $30,000 debt mean? How am I positioning this? And the other thing is, we've been talking about this in financial terms, but there are also lots of non-financial returns to higher education that play a role in some people's decision. They may decide that they want to get a degree in literature simply because they're passionate about literature and they're willing to bear the cost. Or they're willing to, after they graduate, to get a job in something that has nothing to do with literature, but it was a decision they made. They thought it was justified because it has non-pecuniary benefits. I mean, a lot of defenders of the status quo will say that there are other non-pecuniary benefits as well. We know that people who go to college tend to vote more, they tend to be more civically engaged, they tend to be better informed about the world, and they have better health outcomes, which is really, really important for public health. But still, we don't really have a good, clear financial model for this. I mean, both in terms of being able to sustain the sector as it now exists, but also to give students or would-be students a pretty clear, transparent, open glimpse of the road ahead and the possibilities.
Yeah, Professor, can I borrow just a few more minutes of your time? I know you're busy. Can I?
Of course.
Okay, because I was watching one of the older shows from earlier this year, and you had a guest that said, because I'm sensitive to this subject, although I'm not a college graduate, but I'm fascinated with this whole college thing. And it's really about education. You had my son and daughter graduated from liberal arts colleges because our wonderful counselors at our charter school suggested liberal arts colleges for my children. I think it worked out well. But a lot of small colleges are going to have troubles. They're going to close, demographic, blah, blah, blah. You know all the issues they have. But one of your guests said it was something like, I just lost my damn notes. It was like a lot of colleges, they run and they don't have 70% of the revenues they really need to run the operation. I just dropped my note. Did that make sense? One of your guests said it was early this year in April.
But it does. No, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of complicated. Remember what I said about the 4,000 institutions. I should also mention that they're incredibly diverse. We have all kinds of sizes,
right?
All kinds of institutional types. We have all kinds of different missions. We have religious schools, and for just every kind of religion that exists in the United States. We have public universities, military academies. I mean, it's incredibly complex.
I'm sorry, it was 70% of private colleges don't have enough enough money for operating revenues, that kind of stuff. Private colleges. Yeah. Amazing.
Well, and the financial pressure for this is hard. So, just to explain for everybody, most colleges and universities and all private colleges depend primarily on student tuition to pay their own bills. So, they're about 2/3 of American colleges and universities are public. That means they are state funded, but they don't get most of their funding from the state anymore. Private colleges, a couple of them, a handful, the richest, have endowments. Those are basically huge financial instruments that they can draw on, Harvard or Stanford, but the overall majority do not. So they need students to sign up to pay tuition, pay for room and board if they have residential housing. That's their business model. And since 2012, we've had a decline in enrollment. Now that's overall across the whole sector. We're down millions of students from where we were in 2012. The individual colleges and universities, it depends, and sometimes it depends on financial mistakes they may have made or financial wins. Sometimes it depends on their strategies. Sometimes it just depends on where they are geographically. I mean, we mentioned demographics. One of the huge things happening now is the decline in childbirth rates, and that's in the United States. That's especially pronounced in the Midwest and the Northeast. And so that narrows the pipeline of high school kids going to traditional age undergrads. If you take a look at the schools that close, that have cuts, almost without exception, they're ones that have been suffering enrollment drops. So, if you're used to having 10,000 students come in, and the next year you have 8,000, and the year after that 6,000, you don't have enough money to be able to pay everybody to work there. And that's the main expense at colleges and universities. And paying for buildings is something, paying for services is something, but paying for people is the main cost, which is why you have layoffs, cuts, and closures.
And in small liberal arts colleges, I'm assuming they don't have huge endowments like Harvard and some of the other Ivy League schools to stay afloat, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's really only like 20 schools out of that 4,000 really have significant endowments, and they hate to tap them for these purposes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm almost done. I think I don't want to get too much in politics, but I just have to mention it. Tim Walz, the governor
Yeah.
of Minnesota, I think last year he out of about 70%, 75% of jobs in Minnesota, government jobs in Minnesota, would not require a 4-year degree. Now I say that
Yeah.
because I think about 41% of college students going to college, students going to college, they go to community college. Of course, but only about 13% of community college students actually get a 4-year degree. These things are complicated. That's why I had to bring the professor on. The point is that, of course, men are not going to school as much as they should, so let's start with the other question. How does a small college or even a state college fight against the demographics, the destiny of demographics, and other issues to innovate so they can stay open? Because we do need college graduates. We need some smart people in this country. I hope the babble makes sense, Professor.
Well, it does. I mean, you think about the problems facing the United States. I mean, you think about confronting issues such as the huge complexity of geopolitical crises. You think about as well the mega crisis of climate change, as well as you think about some of our domestic political issues. How are we going to rethink and make a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy actually work inclusively? And how do we keep our economy thrumming? I mean, right now, we're actually, on a global stage, we're pretty good. We're doing way better than Europe. And we lack some of the big crises that are afflicting China's economy. But, how do we keep this going? So we obviously need lots of people who have had all kinds of higher education experience, which is not to say that we shouldn't discount the value of those who don't have that experience. Those people play a crucial role as well. But I think in many ways, there are a few strategies that are open right now for colleges and universities that are trying to survive and thrive. One is to change up their international student recruitment. So again, for listeners, American higher education has a lot of international students. This has really taken off since 1990 and really since 2000. But we have a lot of students from around the world. And that's a great thing. American higher education, for all its flaws, is recognized around the world as the gold standard. People really, really respect our research. They really respect our teaching. And so we attract a lot of students that way. And they tend to be students who pay higher rates. So international students are widely sought after. So one solution is to more aggressively go after students from abroad. Now, that's a little challenging at times. We get roughly 1/3 of students from China, and it's possible that the escalating Cold War between the United States and China will reduce that number. It's also possible that we will see demographics reduce that number. I mean, Chinese population is aging up really fast. The number of kids is so low. Your listeners might remember back in the 1970s and 80s, there was the notorious one child per couple policy. Well, right now, Xi Jinping is trying to get parents to have 3 kids just to try and balance the books. India will probably follow suit, and Europe's population is already crashing. So my advice is for college and universities in the United States to really go after the countries where they're still producing kids at scale. That's predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also a couple other countries like Pakistan. Second thing they can do is teach more online. Now, this is hard. I mean, you really have to have either a major institutional commitment to online to do this, and that means you have to pay for a lot of staff, IT staff, educational technologists, instructional designers, and a lot of colleges and universities would rather not do this. You also have to help your faculty learn how to teach online. Now, a lot of them got a crash course on that during the pandemic, but there's still a lot more to learn, a lot of practice that can be done. Now, one challenge for this is that there are a few universities that really own this market. If you look at, say, Western Governors University, Liberty University, the University of Central Florida, Southern New Hampshire University, Arizona State University, they have huge amounts of enrolled students. That's the main focus for those schools. So you have to compete with them. And I think for a lot of colleges and universities, they can only compete on margin. So they put out a few of their specialty classes online and really try and push those. A third, and this is in some ways, I think the most humane and the one that should appeal to us the most, is simply to improve the quality of the student experience. So that means improving teaching and learning. There are all kinds of ways we can do that. It also includes doing a better job of serving students in other ways. So helping them preserve their physical health, their mental health, giving them ways to connect with the community, helping them feel like they belong. And this is where DEI comes in, where you have all kinds of minoritized or marginalized students. And that can happen along different axes. That can happen along axis of gender identity. That can happen along axis of race or religion. It can also happen with first-generation students. Those are students for whom none of their parents or extended family have had college experience. So for first-generation students, it's often pretty daunting to go to college, because college is a strange and unusual place with all kinds of unusual languages and structures. And so, I mean, all these things are possible. We could have that more humane experience. We could teach more online. We can more aggressively recruit internationally. The challenge strategically is it's not easy to do those things. It's expensive, and it requires some institutional reconfiguration. A lot of academics right now feel like they're under threat, and their reaction is to be defensive, to kind of turtle inwards, to protect what they've got, not to be as creative. But I think through this kind of creativity, we can do it. The fourth thing, you said you don't mind if I ramble, so this is
No, I
this
love it. Keep going.
I think committing an institution to climate change is actually going to be a real win. If you poll Americans and you ask them, how concerned are you about climate change? There are huge, huge generational differences. I mean, people roughly over 30, climate change is way down the list of priorities, way down beyond crime, immigration, the economy. But if you poll people under 30, they are much more concerned about climate change. I think it's kind of no-brainer for colleges and universities to offer more classes, more programs, more internships, more degree paths that have to do with the full panoply of climate change. I mean, and it's really a gigantic topic. So, I mean, you can think about, say, having more students who get degrees that lead to green jobs. And green jobs are all over the map. I mean, you've got, for example, electrical engineering, as we're trying to figure out how do you shift the entire civilization off of fossil fuels and onto solar, wind, and renewables. That requires a ton of electrical engineering. There's counseling, advising, and business when you talk to businesses as well as nonprofits and governments, trying to help them figure out how do they make this move? How should they change shipping? How should they change their physical plant? How should they change their offerings? I mean, it really just continues. And I think doubling down or doubling for the first time, investing for the first time in climate change might be a really good thing to do.
Yeah, I can talk about this forever, but we can't. So first, thank you, Professor, for giving me so much and us so much of your valuable time. I can't thank you enough. I'm so excited. But do me a favor and do us a favor. Close the show out by giving advice for first year college students, because I've known so many who go to school that first year and they are back home before you know it. So give some advice for students who they first year, second year, so they can go on and matriculate and graduate.
A few things. One is to make relationships. I know this sounds cheesy, but this is really, really key. You want to make relationships with your professors, and you want to make relationships with your fellow students. The reason for this is the closer you get to your professors, the more you'll get out of the experience, the more you'll be able to learn. And also on the other side of this, once you graduate, you'll be able to draw on them for resources for jobs, in order to provide recommendation letters, but also just to give you career advice. I mean, this is really, really important. And some universities, some colleges do a great job of this. Many do not. So often it's really up to the students to do that and say, introduce themselves, make sure the professor knows them, go to their office hours to try and learn more about them and to get more help and support. Getting more relationships with your fellow students is also really important, because I know this sounds cheesy, but a campus is a learning community, and you can really learn a lot from your classmates, and they can really help you out. They can give you emotional support, they can help you learn, and also they can just kind of help you keep going and keep doing this work. That's a really important thing to do. And again, after college or university, That kind of relationship can really stand you in good stead. This is where a lot of people get married. This is where they find their life partners. But also, this is where you find business partners. This is where you find political connections. I mean, it's really, really important to have that. The second thing overall is to remember that no matter how nervous you feel, I mean, if you feel imposter syndrome, if you feel that you don't belong, it's not true. You do belong. If you're at what is called an open enrollment institution, everyone can go. Everyone has a spot. If you're at a competitive application institution, if you get in, you got in. You deserve to be there. Colleges and universities might not act like it, but they need you there and they want you there. So just remember, if it ever feels weird, if it ever feels awkward, if you feel lost, you are supposed to be there and you can do well. Another thing to keep in mind, if you are an 18-year-old, this is that kind of liminal experience of getting out in the world for a lot of you. And so you should enjoy it, but also, keep an eye and learn. Keep an eye on everything from learning how to live on your own, how to budget, how to interact with people, especially if you came up in COVID. If you spent a lot of time not around people, this is the time where you have to stretch yourself to figure out how to meet people, how to spend time with them, how to deal with awkward face-to-face conversations. And so don't turtle inwards. Just get out there and be with people. So, I mean, of course, work hard at your studies. I mean, that should go without saying, but that's really, really important.